You're listening to the Cash News Podcast with Tom Meehan and Shaun Ferrari.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Cash News Podcast. As always, I'm joined by my co-host and friend, Shaun Ferrari, and we have a special guest, which Shaun will introduce in just a few minutes. This is episode number 10. If you already have listened to us in the past, thank you for listening. This is the first time you're listening. We talk about everything to do with cash, currency, and payments. And today, much like always, we're really excited to be here with you. Over to you, Shaun.
Yeah, no, thanks. As Tom said, thanks for joining, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here again with my good friend Tom. And we are making our way through the summer here. It seems like the summer is rapidly flying by, but we've had a lot of good discussions. And today we're going to continue that. So we welcome Jessica Pohlen to chat with us today. For those of you, I feel like Jessica's out and about as much as we are at the various different shows and talking. I know she's talked at ours at Currency Research for a while. So I think a lot of you know Jessica, but for those of you that don't, she is the VP of Global Product Commercialization. It's a mouthful over at PayComplete. So Jessica, we welcome you to the show, and we just want to chat with you a little bit about what you're seeing out there in the market and what have you. So I say welcome, and maybe you can just start off a little bit with kind of what brings you to this world of PayComplete and cash, and we'll jump into what you're seeing in the market. But
yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Shaun.
Yeah.
And thanks, Tom, as well, for having me here. So my title absolutely is a mouthful, but I think it balances, because people always say I'm a handful. So I think it actually makes sense and kind of matches my personality. So, where I got started in cash management, and maybe that'll be just a quick kind of intro to kind of who I am and why I'm here. So I used to live in Brazil, lived there for about a decade, and consider myself, even though I'm, super, Southern and all of that, I consider myself slightly Brazilian for the amount of time that I spent there. Now, where I got started was actually as a consultant and working with a franchise, a frozen yogurt franchise in California. One of the things that I noticed when getting them kind of going across, different locations in Brazil was that we could never source coin. And it wasn't just, go to your bank and try and, get some coin. We would order it from a CIT, couldn't get it. We would order it from a bank, couldn't get it. I went so far as actually going to the actual central bank in Brasilia, trying to source coin, and I couldn't get it. And so I noticed that it was a systemic issue and kind of more interesting than working on, frozen yogurt and other food franchises. I started to dig into, well, what is this problem with, circulation of currency? And so that's really kind of what got me started in, cash management, understanding how cash and coin circulates, and finding it really interesting. And that has kind of followed me through my career, in that what I really do bring to the table in any one of my roles has been market observation. And so what I've been observing recently, and one of the things that I want to talk to you guys about is, top of mind for, I think, a lot of your listeners and just folks in general. And what we're seeing really is, this massive labor shortage that has become, a huge challenge for every type of business. Even in our own business, it's been tough to find temps, been tough to find, qualified labor, for a multitude of different reasons. And I think, where we're going to expand on that topic is, well, what does that mean for the cash industry? What does that mean for, automation? And so that's what I'd like to talk to you guys about.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's definitely something we're seeing in the market. And it's funny you mentioned you kind of started in the coin circulation challenge area, and as we've talked about on this podcast before, and we at Currency Research held a webinar last week, actually, where we had some folks from the Fed on, and Get Coin Moving, hashtag Get Coin Moving for those that want to look for it, was a big topic, right, of just how to get coin circulating. So things in this industry definitely never fully go away. There's always challenges like that, and yeah, some of it's the labor shortage, as you mentioned. So maybe we pick up on the kind of that labor shortage piece, and kind of, I'll toss it back to you there and just say, what does that mean? What does it mean for cash or coin usage, or what is the industry doing about it?
Yes, I think there's always this fear about automation. Automation is going to come in and take all of our jobs. And I've seen both arguments. So I've seen, people that are experts in, labor economics and have said, you're never going to replace a person with a machine, when that person is providing, a value added service. And that may or may not be true. But I think, what we're seeing is that, there are instances, especially in that payment transaction, where we have been able to automate. And these are things that, are not new to the industry. I mean, automation exists, everything from, a simple vending machine that we've been using, for years. And even prior to that, the automats, where you were sticking coins and getting your cup of coffee. So, that automation has always existed. And I think what we're seeing now, and you're seeing a lot of this experimentation with, different groups. I mean, originally you saw, a group like Home Depot who was, shifting to self-checkout, giving you, those scanning guns, and then kind of reverting their cashiers into more kind of host-like functions. And we're starting to see that expand to other retailers where, previously you would have these, aisles and aisles and aisles of cashiers. So places like Walmart, in particular, I've noticed that, Walmart in multiple different regions is running, they're running stores now that are completely self-checkout. So everywhere from Fayetteville, North Carolina to, Dallas, Texas, Osceola, Florida, they're testing out this concept of, removing the cashier from the mix and, to an extent, either replacing or reallocating that labor to higher value add. And so, that is something that we're seeing. I think it is, compounded by the fact that we are experiencing significant labor shortages across, every industry at the moment. And so that's been kind of one of the most interesting things to see. Now, I know that you guys have had other episodes where you've spoken to, folks in our industry about, some of the solutions that exist. And so I'm not really going to dig so much into that, but, looking at, well, what are the challenges and opportunities for those of us that operate in this industry?
Yeah, it's always interesting. I just a quick anecdote on automation. I saw on the news this past week, a restaurant somewhere was they got a robot, and it was just driving along, delivering the food to people. But the interesting part was you had like a wait staff walking behind the robot to then move the plate from the robot to the table. So I was trying to figure out what's the point of this. But but nonetheless, I mean, I think it is interesting as these things kind of roll out.
Yeah, and in product management, we usually call that's the MVP, the minimally viable product, let's just go test a concept, even just duct tape some wheels on that machine and see if it flies. But, interesting point. I mean, you're seeing, some of the kind of more advanced, technology things that you would expect to see, like out of Japan, where you do have, robots that are restocking shelves of convenience stores. I mean, here we're seeing a little bit, I think I wouldn't call it timid innovation. It would be kind of more standard innovation where, you're looking at where you can cut costs. Another great example, and this has been out in the news for about 6 months now, Steak and Shake, they had shut all of their lobby restaurant area, obviously during COVID, a lot of restaurants had done the same thing. But for them, it was, an opportunity to revamp their model. Ultimately who they're competing with, are folks that don't have, that dine-in experience with, servers and wait staff. And ultimately what they had seen was that their cost of labor was about 40% of overall costs. Now with, the pricing that they have to compete with for the product, obviously it's not a sustainable model. So, one of the things that you'll see now as they start to reopen these stores, they've taken this opportunity to completely revamp and reconstruct and essentially, reallocate some of the staff that is coming back, not all of them obviously coming back, to have these, kind of more concierge type roles. So assisting with those kiosks. Now, the challenge that we're seeing obviously in our industry is a lot of times people take this moment of innovation to move away from cash, and they think that innovation is moving away from cash. And I think, obviously I don't have to evangelize that to the group that's going to be listening to this, but ultimately, we know that there are alternatives, and we know that, ultimately, they have to do whatever the customer is going to be asking of them. They want to ensure the customer experience, and that extends to payments. So I think that's a very important message for, folks outside of our industry, that are making some of these decisions, to be aware of.
Yeah, I think when it's a good point. I think anytime there's a whole bunch of media attention on a cashless society, and it's been tried and failed everywhere. It's tried for a whole numerous reasons. And we talk about this feels like on every episode, and not for self-preservation, but because it has to do with everything we do on the podcast. And I think when you're talking about automation, or in the quick serve environment, people automatically go, well, oh yeah, the going away from cash, going away from people. But it's really more important to look at how do we make cash more accessible, easier for the people that work for you and your customer base. And just an interesting tidbit about automation or AI. It's a big marketing, right, buzzword, right? AI is a buzzword. Artificial intelligence really just means a computer or a machine mimicking a human behavior. The machine learning is when you get into the really cool stuff, but AI, your ATMs are a perfect example of artificial intelligence. They took over what a human did. Automatic teller machines, that is AI. When I say that, people go, oh, no, they automatically think robots, drones, all these other things, but it really, AI and automation has been around forever. And the typical design is to make things more efficient. And self-checkout generally does not eliminate humans, it reallocates. Also, the dirty secret, and I don't think it's a dirty secret, is there's a legitimate labor shortage. People don't necessarily, it's not that easy to fill those jobs. So if you're in a retail environment, you need to be able to service your customer. And the other example that comes to mind, and this is old now, right? This is old news, but when I worked in Manhattan, one of the first McDonald's that put the kiosks in was next to my office. And at first, everybody overreacted, and this was a pilot, so they literally took away the registers. It was just the kiosk, but they had to have someone stand at each kiosk because you have to show people how to use it. And after the pilot, they left the kiosks in and they went to 2 registers instead of 5 registers. This is a very busy Manhattan location. So the automation just helped speed the process up. And I actually got to know the GM and was talking to them, and they said, no, we have more people than we had before. We're just faster now. And he said, at first we were really thinking like, oh, we could do a labor savings, but the reality is what we learned is it gave us an efficiency that we didn't. And it also, they realized that some customers like to use the machines and some people don't. And if you're like me, who doesn't want sugar in their coffee, doesn't want anything on their burger, like the machine for me, I don't want to use the machine because I'm guaranteed that it's going to get messed up because of the way it works. So I think there is this feeling about automation eliminating jobs, and certainly we'll be realistic that it could, but in every time we've really seen it in practicality outside of manufacturing, we haven't seen that. And even in manufacturing, there's still a lot of people. It's just they're doing different things. And I'll leave with this, which is the Walmart example that the Wall Street Journal really, every major news outlet, just if everyone remembers, Walmart did a big roll of robots in stores, and they pulled the stores and said it actually was not cost effective, that they could be more efficient and quicker with people. And they publicized that in their retail stores. That's what they said. In their DCs and other environments, they said that wasn't necessarily the case, and they didn't give specifics. But what they said is, yeah, we did this, and what we realized is it wasn't actually more efficient. It wasn't less expensive, and that's a good example of, I think, when you think about sometimes trying something, kudos to them for trying it. Kudos to them for actually going out and saying, I need to do this to see what happens. It's very much like the cashierless stores that you see with Amazon Go or 7-Eleven is they're not really cost effective right now, that you have to try it to see what you need to do with the model. And even those, when you talk about the cashless side of it, is, well, if I have to use an app, why do I need to take cash? Because just because I have an app doesn't mean, I'm going to use that money. And then in those environments, and we definitely talked about this, I think during the APAC thing, there's still a lot of people that don't have smartphones or don't use smartphones. So you eliminate actually a very large percentage of the population. So all of these things are really relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that goes to, what I've learned by being a product manager for several years now. it's essentially your view of the market and what the market demands, and the technology that might fit that market demand is based off of your own experience. So it's your own observation. So, as someone who is in that innovation group, if you fall within a certain demographic here in the United States, we can basically, between Tom and Shaun, they can basically tell you, without ever knowing who you are, what percentage of cash you transact with and what percentage card. And, we know what your experience essentially is. And so your view of, what you think is needed versus what you learn once you deploy is always very interesting. And so that's one of the things that I love. So Tom, similar to you, when McDonald's rolled those out, I think this was, a few years later, one of my favorite things to do is actually something called Mojito. And it's nothing important happens in the office, and it's market observation essentially. So I did this at my local McDonald's, who had just put in their kiosks, and I sat there and literally just did check marks every time I saw someone use the kiosk or use the cashier. And my observation, and granted this is about 3.5 years ago, was that people would walk up to the kiosk because it was new, it was exciting. But as soon as they saw that the cashier was free, they immediately ran over to the cashier. Because it was at the same time, you're clicking through all of those different options. It's a little bit too much at times. Now it'd be interesting to see it nowadays, maybe COVID aside, where, dining room usage has gone down significantly, but, have we gotten more used to that technology to the point where, we are more efficient with it? So I'm curious to see.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting as we come out of COVID, which, hopefully we get there at some point. But as we move out, what does happen with payments? I mean, we saw from a lot of the studies and the diary studies that the Fed has done, there has been this significant decline or shift away from using cash. There's more cash out there. So it's this paradox, right? There's more cash out there still. So it's going somewhere. People are using it, but there's also the shift away from it where the percentage of transactions are going down that are cash, which makes sense because everybody's, using shopping at home and using apps and doing all that sort of stuff. So as we come out of this, we'll see. I think there's in economics, right? We always assume that everyone is a rational actor. In reality, I don't know what percentage of people are rational, very few. So a lot of it can go out the window. But it's also removal of a choice, right? In terms of payment choice, people don't like to be told they can't do something. So even if I don't normally use cash and I walk into a place and it says cash not accepted, there's like this negative, like, what? You're going to tell me I can't do this? And so it's just
I mean, Tom and I wrote about this, in an article back in December, which was the irrational fear of cash. And it was interesting because as we were doing the research for that article, it became clear to me, at least for the markets that I was surveying, that, US, Canada, mainland Europe, places like that, we were seeing, kind of this immediate rush to, oh my gosh, cash is a transmission method, cash is dirty, cash is, and merchants immediately putting up those do not accept cash signs. And it was funny because I had conversations with, cash and transit providers and retailers in Latin America. And I didn't get any of that. And maybe it was a small sample pool, and somebody who is listening can say that that's, otherwise. But it was funny that in cash intensive markets, that was not an issue. But in a market like ours, it became an immediate, like, well, oh my gosh, get rid of the cash because we're all going to get COVID from it.
I'm muted, which I'm pretty good at on the podcast. So can't say I'm good at it any other time, but on the podcast, I'm usually pretty good about that. I think it's interesting because I had actually, and I know that we did the research, but I also called a lot of people and talked about, I have a friend in Germany who said, well, of course we use cash. We're going to continue to use cash. We always use cash. Like he was kind of like, what do you mean? Like he was, it is very specific to the market. They also, I think, certainly there has been a digital transformation that's been occurring over the last 20 years, forget about it, but in the last 5 to 10 years it's accelerated dramatically from the enhancements in smartphones and chip and computer. So some of this was on the roadmap and was happening already. It just really jumped because of COVID. And I believe that some of it had to do with, an actual need. And then certainly, any and all of the folks that did contactless payment went and said, look, we can do this, and really pushed heavily, which is the right thing to do to help, help piece it. The one thing Shaun says, and I guess I'm just like Shaun and don't realize it, is that when I see that people don't say keep cash, even if I have $3 in my pocket, I'm like, they shouldn't do that. I can't do that. Like, I should be able to pay with whatever I want. And it is kind of the feeling of why are retailers specifically think that's a good idea? And I obviously talk to a lot of retailers, and at times someone will be like, well, we only take 7% cash. I'm like, well, you're a publicly held company. I know how much you make. That's a lot of money. Like that, are you really willing to upset 7% of your customers? And immediately they go, I never really thought of it that way. That's usually the comment of what it is. Or a really honest comment of, well, we have a lot of trouble with CIT, and we have a lot of trouble with moving money, and we lose money. And that's the reality. And that's what I keep going back to for us, because all three of us work in the industry. Even though we're in different capacities, our goal is to help make it easier. And the reality is today, that's got to be all of our focal points. So anybody that's listening that is in the actual cash handling business, whatever that means, whether you're recyclers or safes, even traditional safes, making it easy for the consumer and the people handling is what life is all about. And that's actually what automation is about, right? That's what we keep going back to. So I think the interesting part about COVID, and I hate talking about COVID, prior to the podcast, we were talking about how it always comes up, but the reality is we're faced with a potential second wave. And I'm not a doctor or scientist, so I'm not saying that, there is, or it isn't, or isn't going to happen. But the reality is, we know now how to wear masks in the US. We understand how to conduct business that way. We also probably know, and unless that money doesn't make you get COVID, we probably have all figured that out, that the science is out there. So if this does change, we don't know we don't know what the consumer behavior will be after this. We may have gone to a lower transaction of cash. That doesn't mean that it's going to go away. We know that there are many retail establishments that still have over 60% cash penetration. We know that the food establishments do. So we know that that's still there. And payment of choice, which we know we'll talk about in an upcoming episode, is real because of the discrimination and the unbanked piece of it. But at the end of the day, Jessica, I guess my question is, and this is probably, it may be repetitive from a number of episodes, but I'm curious of your insight of what are you seeing with the trends specific to what you're doing? What are you actually seeing? Are you seeing a larger adoption of recyclers or smart safes? Are you seeing just an interest or an actual adoption? Well, what's occurring?
Yeah, well, so I will answer that question, but I actually wanted to pick up on something else that you're talking about earlier, which is, talking about innovation and how we kind of see ourselves as a part of this industry. And I think one of the things that gets lost is, cash management has been traditionally left out of fintech, at least from a categorization standpoint. And I think that's completely incorrect. Recently I just did a course with Berkeley, and there was no mention of actual physical cash. And one of the things that I think that our industry needs to focus on, because ultimately what we are producing, so what you were asking about, smart safes, cash recyclers, self-checkout, those are IoT devices. Those are fintech devices. We don't call them that, but they are. And I think that's a really important distinction, that as players in this industry, we also need to evangelize that message. And the piece of that I think is important is where we play is in physical finance. Now, I'm coining this right now, but these are in-person transactions. That's the market that we play in. Cash is an in-person, transaction. And the physical finance piece within fintech is extremely important. Now that I've finished kind of evangelizing something that I think that we need to latch on to and start to really, use as a terminology, and position ourselves within fintech, I'll answer your other question. So I would say yes, but for a few different reasons. So, within recyclers, obviously there are, a few instances of, some of our clients one in particular, a stadium client, decided to go essentially completely cashless. Now, previously the plan was for, recyclers across their footprint. Now they have these kind of cash to card kiosks. So they've kind of been testing that out, to see ultimately, like to your point, our customer is going to decide to go elsewhere. Now, once you've already bought a ticket and you're in a stadium, you might not really have that choice. And if it's your team, maybe you'll still go even if they're not going to be accepting cash. But I think that's a separate, kind of instance. I think in other markets, we really are seeing the return of cash. People are transacting in person, and they're I think trying to forget some of the things that they've been going through for the last, 14, 18 months. And while some habits, like food delivery and other things kind of have become now part of the mainstream, things that we do, and myself included, more than we would care to admit because it is so convenient. And ultimately we've seen, at least in the US, those are places where cash is not accepted as a payment method. So I would say we are seeing a great deal of implementations. It's not something where my team is worried about having a job within the next several years. There's a place for our devices. I think the important piece is going beyond the device and starting to look at, well, how do we make this more efficient? How do we make cash easier for everybody across that cash cycle? So everybody from the end user, the consumer who's conducting that physical financial transaction, to the people that are removing the cash from, the system, to the people that are receiving that data and processing that information within their organization. And I think that's the critical piece.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I mean, it's through the whole chain. I know I saw some info from the Bureau of Engraving and Printing this week where they're really looking at things to put in the next generation of currency as they're starting to talk about what new designs look like, right? That make it easier to be machine readable and integrate with everything. So I think that, from the outset all the way through to the consumer, how do you make the channel easier? And that's what we are all looking at. So I think we can figure that out. That's what hopefully a lot of these discussions and a lot of our events and stuff are geared at, try to get everybody together to talk about that. But you're exactly right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, Shaun, the conferences that, you have with ICOS, that's when you have all of those brains in one room. I mean, those are the folks that are, coming up with, the optical sensors and the magnetic sensors and infrared and every type of way that we can read a note more efficiently and accept, a broader range of quality notes. I think that's an important piece of the process. Absolutely.
Well, I want to certainly thank you for joining us, and you're welcome to join us again. I think when we put together that panel piece, we'll certainly reach out and hopefully it'll work out. We're looking at putting kind of a virtual kind of panel together, and we're certainly going to tape live at the events that are coming up, and where I'm really excited about that, to actually get to an event with Shaun and actually sit next to him and talk. And we not that I don't like the video, but it's always good to be in person. So thank you very much. And Shaun, I'll turn it over to you for the extra.
Yeah, no, this was great. And as Tom said, we're looking to put some panels together here where hopefully we can get all that together, but we are definitely doing that at our upcoming events, and we're looking forward to it. It's definitely an interesting time, particularly with the Delta variant kind of coming out right now, just in terms of what's going to happen. But right now, most of the events that I'm aware of, ours and others, seem to still be proceeding. So we're excited about that. We've got one in Amsterdam coming up in the end of October, early November. Our Americas one, hopefully Jessica will be there. We'll be in San Diego in early December, but we're excited for that, and a lot of good chatter, and people are looking forward to getting together again. And then our big banknote one in February is looking really good right now. People might be a little more hesitant. There seems to be some sort of magical thought about what's going to happen at the end of December, where people are like, "Oh, February is great, but December we just have to wait and kind of see." It's as I said, people aren't necessarily rational at all times. But anyway, we're excited about it, and the panels are shaping up good. So, all these discussions will be there. So once again, thanks everybody for listening. Thank you, Jessica, for being part of this. And we look forward to talking with everybody and sharing some more thoughts next week. So thanks, everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Cash News Podcast. We hope you found this episode insightful. Don't forget to like and review us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter, and be sure to visit us at thecashnews.com to stay up to date with the latest on the world of cash. Thanks again for listening to the Cash News Podcast.